What if the reason you haven't reached the life you want isn't because you're not capable? What if it's simply because you stopped right before things were about to change? Think about that for a second. How many things in your life ended with the same quiet sentence? Maybe this just isn't for me. A goal you once cared about, a routine you started with excitement, a version of yourself you genuinely believed you could become. And then somewhere along the way, something shifted. Energy dropped. Doubt got louder. The progress you expected didn't show up fast enough. And slowly, without any dramatic moment, you walked away. Not because you're lazy, not because you don't want a better life, but because something inside your mind convinced you that continuing might not be worth it. Now here's the strange part. Almost everyone experiences this moment. That exact moment when persistence starts feeling pointless. But a small group of people do something different. They stay. Not because they're fearless, not because they're more talented. They stay because they understand something most people never realize. And the book, Until It Happens, The Power of Refusing to Quit, is built around this exact discovery. But before we get there, you have to recognize something about your own mind. Because the real battle was never outside you. It's always been happening inside. Picture this. You start something new. Maybe it's a fitness goal, a business idea, learning a skill. For the first few days, maybe even weeks, everything feels good. You're motivated, focused, excited. You imagine the future version of yourself like it's already real. But then something subtle appears. Resistance. Not dramatic resistance, quiet resistance. You wake up one morning and suddenly the routine feels heavier. Your mind starts negotiating. Maybe today isn't the best day. Maybe I need to plan more first. Maybe I should wait until I feel more motivated. And suddenly the same action that felt exciting yesterday feels exhausting today. Let me ask you something honestly. Does this pattern sound familiar? Think about it. Most people don't quit immediately. They slowly drift away from their goals. One skip day, then another, then a week passes, and eventually the goal disappears from your daily life completely. But here's where things get interesting. Most people think quitting happens because they lack discipline. But that's not what the psychology shows. The real reason people quit is far more subtle. They quit because their brain interprets uncertainty as danger. When progress isn't visible yet, the brain panics. It starts whispering questions. What if this never works? What if you're wasting your time? What if you try your hardest and still fail? And here's the cruel twist. The closer you are to a real breakthrough, the louder those doubts become. That moment right before progress appears, that's often the exact moment quitting feels most logical. But this is where the idea behind Until It Happens becomes powerful. Because the author argues something almost uncomfortable. Most people quit not because they failed, but because they didn't stay long enough for success to become visible. Think about that. Progress doesn't show up immediately. Results hide in the future. Which means commitment requires something difficult, believing in outcomes you can't see yet. Now pause for a second. How many things in your life might have worked if you had simply stayed longer? Don't rush that answer. Just let it sit in your mind. Most people never ask themselves that question honestly, because it's uncomfortable. But it also reveals something important. The difference between people who eventually succeed and those who constantly restart their goals often comes down to one decision. They refuse to quit before the invisible phase ends. And that invisible phase is where most dreams quietly die. But here's the part nobody tells you. That phase can feel incredibly frustrating. It's the time where effort doesn't seem to match results, where you feel like you're moving, but not arriving anywhere. And during this time, your brain becomes your biggest opponent. It starts producing very convincing arguments for quitting. Maybe this isn't realistic. Maybe you're not talented enough. Maybe you should try something easier. And those thoughts feel rational, logical even. But wait until you hear this. Those thoughts aren't necessarily truth. They're survival mechanisms. Your brain trying to protect you from uncertainty. But the people who eventually achieve the things others give up on, they interpret that voice very differently. They recognize doubt as a signal. Not to quit, but to keep going a little longer. And that shift changes everything. It becomes something else entirely. Proof that you're still in the game. There's a psychological trap almost everyone falls into. And the worst part? It feels completely reasonable while it's happening. The trap is called the results illusion. It works like this. You start something new with hope. You expect progress to show up quickly. Not overnight, but soon enough to prove you're on the right path. But reality moves slower than expectations. And when results don't appear fast enough, your brain starts asking dangerous questions. Is this even working? Am I wasting my time? Should I just try something else? Now here's where things get interesting. Those questions don't appear because you're weak. They appear because the human brain is wired to look for feedback. Proof, evidence, something that tells you your effort matters. But many of the most important changes in life happen silently at first, under the surface, where you can't see them. Think about planting a seed. The first thing that happens isn't visible growth. It's invisible development. Roots spreading underground. Structure forming where no one can see it. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. But underground, everything is changing. Human progress works the same way. When you start learning a skill, your brain is building neural pathways before performance improves. When you start exercising, your body is adapting internally before physical changes appear. When you start building a project, the early work is usually messy and invisible. And that invisible stage is exactly where most people quit, because it feels like effort without reward. Let me ask you something. Have you ever stopped something because it felt like nothing was happening? Maybe after a few weeks, maybe after a few months. But later, you wondered what might have happened if you stayed just a little longer. That question can haunt people, because the truth is, many breakthroughs happen right after the moment most people quit. And that's the central idea behind until it happens. Success often arrives after a long period where it feels like success will never come. But here's the psychological twist. The longer that invisible phase lasts, the louder your doubt becomes. Your brain hates uncertainty. It wants closure, answers, certainty. So when results don't appear quickly, your mind starts protecting itself. It lowers expectations. It convinces you to walk away. Not because the goal is impossible, but because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. And this is where persistence becomes rare. Not because people lack ability, but because they underestimate how long the invisible phase lasts. Let's pause here for a moment. Think about the biggest goal you've ever attempted. Now think about the moment you stopped. Was it because you truly couldn't continue? Or because it felt like continuing might not be worth it? Be honest with yourself. Most people stop during that emotional gray zone. Not failure, not success, just uncertainty. And uncertainty can feel unbearable if you're not prepared for it. But the people who eventually succeed understand something important. Uncertainty is not evidence of failure. It's evidence you're still early in the process. And once you accept that, something strange happens. You stop chasing constant validation. You stop needing daily proof that things are working. You begin trusting the process itself. Now here's where the real shift begins, because refusing to quit isn't just about pushing harder. It's about redefining what progress means. Most people measure progress by results: weight lost, money earned, recognition received. But the people who refuse to quit measure progress differently. They measure consistency. Did I show up today? Did I move forward even slightly? Did I continue even when motivation disappeared? And when you start measuring progress that way, the invisible phase stops feeling pointless, because every day you continue becomes a win. But here's the part that changes everything. Consistency doesn't just move you closer to results. It transforms who you believe you are. Every time you continue when quitting would be easier, you collect evidence. Evidence that you're someone who doesn't stop easily. Evidence that you're someone who can endure uncertainty. And identity grows from that evidence. But wait until you hear this next idea, because it reveals why refusing to quit can feel almost impossible sometimes. And once you understand this, you'll start recognizing the exact moment most people give up. The moment where everything feels hardest. The moment right before change finally begins. The moment most people quit isn't the beginning. And it's not the end either. It's the middle. That strange, frustrating space where you've already invested time and effort, but the results still don't match the vision you had in your head. At the beginning, everything feels exciting. New goals come with energy, hope, momentum. Your imagination does most of the work. You picture the future version of yourself, and it feels close enough to touch. But then, the middle arrives. And the middle is where things get uncomfortable. Because excitement fades, progress slows down, and suddenly the path forward feels unclear. You're no longer starting, but you're not succeeding yet either. You're just continuing. And that's when the mind starts asking its most dangerous question. Is this worth it? Now here's the interesting part. That question doesn't show up when things are easy. It appears exactly when persistence is required. Which means the moment you're most tempted to quit might also be the moment you're closest to something meaningful. But the middle has another problem. It's boring. Nobody talks about that part. Movies skip it. Success stories fast forward through it. But real growth happens in long stretches of ordinary effort. Days that feel repetitive. Weeks where progress feels invisible. Moments where you wonder if you're just fooling yourself. Let me share something most people won't admit. Almost everyone who achieves something meaningful experiences this thought at some point. What if I'm wrong about this? That thought can feel terrifying because it makes every step forward feel uncertain. But here's the twist. That thought is actually proof that you're doing something real. If your path felt perfectly certain the entire time, you wouldn't be growing. You'd just be repeating something safe. So uncertainty isn't a sign you're lost. It's a sign you're expanding beyond your comfort zone. Still, knowing that doesn't always make the middle easier, because persistence requires energy, and energy drops when rewards feel far away. That's when the brain begins offering alternatives, easier paths, safer choices, quick distractions. Maybe I should try something else. Maybe this goal isn't practical. Maybe I'll come back to it later. But here's the truth hiding underneath those thoughts. Most of the time, later really means never. Because the longer you step away from something meaningful, the harder it becomes to return. Momentum fades, confidence drops, and eventually the idea becomes just another unfinished chapter in your life. Now pause here for a second. How many unfinished chapters do you already have? Projects that started with excitement but slowly disappeared. Habits that lasted for a few weeks and then faded away. Dreams that felt real once, but now feel distant. You're not alone if that list is longer than you'd like. Most people live with dozens of those unfinished stories. But the people who change their lives dramatically, they eventually make a quiet decision. They stop abandoning the middle. Instead of searching for new beginnings over and over, they stay long enough to see something through. And something fascinating happens when you do that. The middle eventually transforms. Not suddenly, but gradually. The effort that once felt exhausting begins to feel normal. The routine becomes familiar, and the doubts that once felt overwhelming start losing their authority. Because repetition does something powerful to the brain. It replaces fear with familiarity. The unknown slowly becomes known, and the thing you once struggled to continue becomes part of your identity. But this next part is where the real power of refusing to quit shows up.
Because staying through the middle eventually leads to something unexpected. Momentum. Not the fragile excitement from the beginning, a deeper momentum built from accumulated effort. And when that momentum appears, progress starts accelerating in ways that once felt impossible. But here's the secret most people miss. Momentum doesn't come from intensity. It comes from persistence. And that means something important. The real power of refusing to quit isn't just reaching the goal. It's becoming the type of person who finishes what they start. But wait until you hear what happens next. Because once someone experiences the breakthrough that comes from staying long enough, their entire relationship with effort begins to change. And that shift might be the most valuable lesson in the entire journey.
Something unexpected happens when you stay long enough. Not just long enough to see results, but long enough to experience the moment where effort finally starts working with you instead of against you. At first, persistence feels heavy. Every step requires conscious effort. Every decision to continue feels like a small battle inside your mind. But somewhere along the way, that battle starts getting quieter. The routine becomes familiar. The actions become automatic. And the resistance that once felt overwhelming begins to shrink. Not because the work disappeared, but because you changed. This is the moment most people never reach. The moment where persistence stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like power. But wait till you hear this. The real reward isn't the result you were chasing in the beginning. It's the transformation that happened while you were chasing it. Because refusing to quit rewires something deep inside you. It replaces doubt with trust. Trust that effort eventually compounds. Trust that progress is often invisible before it becomes obvious. Trust that uncertainty doesn't mean you're lost. It just means you're early. Now think back to the version of you at the beginning of this journey, the one who felt stuck, overwhelmed, maybe even a little tired of restarting the same goals again and again. That version of you believed something quietly discouraging, that maybe success belonged to people who were naturally stronger, more disciplined, more talented. But now you know something different. The people who eventually reach extraordinary outcomes are rarely the most gifted. They're simply the ones who stayed through the invisible phase, stayed through the frustrating middle, stayed long enough for momentum to appear. And once you experience that process even once, your entire perspective changes. Because you realize something powerful. Results aren't always a reflection of ability. They're often a reflection of endurance, the willingness to continue when progress feels uncertain. And here's the surprising part. Once someone learns that lesson, quitting starts feeling very different. Not impossible, but unnecessary. Because you begin to recognize the pattern. The moment doubt appears, the moment progress slows down, the moment your brain tries to convince you that stopping is logical. You've seen this movie before, and you know something the old version of you didn't know. Those moments don't mean the journey is failing. They mean you're approaching the part where most people give up. And staying through that moment is what changes everything. But there's one final realization hidden inside the idea of refusing to quit. And it's worth thinking about carefully. Refusing to quit doesn't mean forcing yourself endlessly without direction. It means choosing goals that matter enough to stay for. Because persistence without purpose becomes exhaustion. But persistence with meaning becomes momentum. So the real question isn't just, can you refuse to quit? The real question is, what is important enough in your life to keep going until it happens? Not until it gets hard. Not until it gets uncertain. Until it happens. Think about that for a moment. What in your life deserves that level of commitment? A healthier version of yourself? A skill you've always wanted to master? A project you once believed in deeply? Whatever it is, the path forward probably won't be smooth. There will be moments when motivation disappears, moments when progress feels invisible, moments when quitting feels completely reasonable. But now you know something most people overlook. Those moments aren't signs you should stop. They're signs you're inside the exact phase where persistence matters most. And if this idea resonates with you, if some part of this story feels uncomfortably familiar, then maybe this is the moment where things start changing. Not through a dramatic decision, but through a quiet one. The decision to stay just a little longer than you usually would, to continue one more day, one more attempt, one more step forward. Because breakthroughs rarely belong to the most talented people. They belong to the ones who stayed long enough for change to catch up with their effort. And if this message landed somewhere inside you, don't just scroll past it. Sit with it for a moment. Think about the version of your life that might exist on the other side of persistence. And if you want more conversations like this, subscribe. Not because you need motivation, but because sometimes a reminder is all it takes to keep going.